Okay, so we're gonna talk about the Genesis now, and there's like 3 systems we're gonna cover with the Genesis. And again, this is really one of the ones I really wanted you guys to see, just so you can see how truly interesting it looks. My wife thinks it's hideous, and can't really argue with her in some cases. So we're gonna talk about the Genesis, which is right here. Now, first thing, this is the actual Genesis console, and this is a Genesis Model 2. It's a little bit shorter than the original Genesis, and it fits here better. This is a Sega CD. So what happened was, you know, as we guys read, Sega releases the Genesis. It's a 16-bit system, and then they pretty much start dominating the market. And with the advent of CD technology, Sega uses the expansion port on the side of the Genesis to create the Sega CD. Now again, this is the Model 2. It's a little bit different than the Model 1, which goes underneath. It kind of makes it taller. And so you have the Sega CD expansion that allows you to play CD games, right? And then you guys probably wonder what this little mushroom here is on top of it, and this is the 32X. So a couple years after they released the Sega CD, they realized that 32-bit was the next step, and so they released a third add-on for the Genesis, which was the 32X. Now, what kind of sucked about this whole system, while it was cool that you could add on to your system, the problem was you're looking at like $100 for like a Genesis. It was like, you know, $200 for like the Sega CD, and then it was like $150 for the 32X, and so you're looking at like almost $500 to upgrade to a 32-bit system, which just did not make a lot of sense, especially when around the corner of this release, the Sony PlayStation had already been announced. Now, you guys are probably familiar. I'm going to put my arm here. You know, Sega Genesis games came in their little hard cases, and you know, you have your standard cartridge that would go into the Genesis. Now, with the 32X, the cartridges fit actually in the same, and if the 32-bit, then this 32-bit will kick in on the 32X, and if they're not, when you power it up, it just powers up like, you know, just a regular Genesis game. So this is a regular Sega Genesis cartridge, you know, in the 32X, and this is kind of what you just had to do. This is the only way you can load games once you add the 32X to it. This is Street Fighter, and what you'll probably notice right at the bat, you know, huge difference in graphic capabilities from the 3DO. If you guys looked at that video already, so this is again not terrible, but you know, definitely not the greatest graphics you're ever going to see in your life. So yeah, I'm not gonna actually play the game, but you guys will just be able to see the graphics of it, right? So it's a Sega Genesis. Now with the Sega CD, so let me just come out. All right, so with the Sega CD, you had to have a cartridge not loaded, and then you just need to make sure you have a disc in the tray, which we'll grab. And kind of like what 3DO did, Sega CD games came in these huge long boxes, and these are actually really hard to get your hands on now. This is how they released them originally. Another kind of fun fact about Sega CD is because it's so old, they didn't know anything about, and they weren't really prepared for piracy, so Sega CD games can be completely copied. So you probably see a lot of pirated games on the internet. So when you fire up the Sega CD without anything in it, or without the disc tray closed, instead of it booting up normally, it boots up with a special menu. So this is the screen you get when you don't actually have a Sega CD disc in it, and what the Sega CD did allow you to do is if you didn't play games, you could always actually play CDs with this, and this is something that Sega kept throughout all of their versions of their consoles. So, you know, you drop the tray in, and then it'll go ahead and check the disc, and then load the disc up. Right? Sega. So that everybody remembers. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, so Sega CD. Now, what you guys will notice when you start looking at some of the full motion video with this is the Sega CD was nowhere near the capability of graphics that the 3DO was. Again, this is a 16-bit system trying to pump images. And granted, this is all like CG or like hand-drawn sprite stuff, but you can look at how pixelated this is, and this was like really good graphics that they could produce at the time versus what the 32 or what the 3DO was able to do. Now, the 32X, what that introduced, and then we'll pop in the game here in a second, was again the 32-bit stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and kill this thing here, and we're going to put a 32X game in. Okay, so 32X games, they came in boxes that look like this, and they'd have like the 32X marking on them. And if you look, 32X cartridges look almost identical. I'll hold these up to the camera, to regular cartridges. They're pretty much the same size. They just have a little bit of different styling in the front of it to indicate that it's a 32X game. Drop the 32X in there, fire it up, and it'll automatically see the 32X over this. Let me hit that button. There it goes. Now you'll notice with the 32X, even though this is a cartridge-based game, it actually does a little bit better graphic-wise. This is the old Star Wars arcade game. So you can see how the scaling on the graphics works a lot better with this one versus the other one. And so you can see that it's actually rendering in 3D, whereas before most things were in 2D. This is doing a full 3D render, which is all pretty new at the time.
Attention all wing pilots. Stand by to receive
So old school.
Wipe out enemy fighters.
The worst voice acting ever. Wipe out enemy fighters. So anyways, you guys get the idea. This is it's much newer than, at least graphic wise, it's a lot better than what the original Sega Genesis was. Alright, so let me go ahead and kill this. Alright. So that's the Genesis, and again, you had to add all three of these peripherals in order to get the full 32-bit experience. And it was significantly expensive. Now granted, it was cheaper than buying a 3DO at the time. Doesn't make it really a good buy, especially if you have to buy it all at once.